We are now looking at a world in which we're going to have what I call the laptop replacement. Now, I call it the laptop replacement sort of in homage to the fact that last year in the United States at retail, it was the first time that laptops outsold desktops. Customers went in, they looked at the desktop, they looked at the laptop, they said, you know, the laptop does everything I need, I think that's what I'm going to get. 10 years ago, you know, none of us would have predicted that. Laptops were bulky, they were never as functional, they were far more expensive. But now, the laptop has indeed become the desktop replacement, and we see that trend beginning to show up in the enterprise as well. So, as a futurist, what I'm interested in is what is the laptop replacement? What is the device that 5 years from now the customer goes into the store and says, there's a laptop, there's device X. You know what? Device X does everything I need. I think that's what I want. Just one example of how this device could mutate. I saw something quite a bit like this. A guy had put together a prototype, and it had a chip on the back of it, which projected in bright red light a virtual keyboard on any flat surface. You could actually just set this up, the keyboard was projected in front, it sensed all your finger movements, and you could type right away. You can actually buy those today. An Israeli company makes them. They're now about the size of maybe a salt shaker, and they connect to your phone by Bluetooth. But the company's already made them in single chip format, and they'll be built into cell phones, probably starting in 2009. So there's your keyboard. On the back of this phone, there was a device about the size of a stick of gum. And what it was something they're calling now a pico projector. Basically, a highly miniaturized LCD projector that at a distance of about a meter throws an image 20 by 30 inches. Full color, pretty high resolution. So now you had this device that you're carrying around in your pocket, but you want to use it at your desk. You basically set it down. You have a keyboard projected in front and a screen projected up there. The statistic I like is because of the nature of the millennial generation, more about them later. Between now and 2015, we will have 50 million more licensed drivers in the United States. Now, 50 million boomers are not going to give up their licenses. So if you think it's crowded out there now, it's actually going to get more crowded. And so even assuming we solve our energy problems, the simple cost of congestion and moving people around is going to get higher and higher. So that's going to drive virtuality. And really briefly, here's my vision of where that goes. And it comes from something I saw 20 years ago at Xerox PARC. Well, most of you probably know Xerox PARC no longer really exists in its old form, but essentially if you'd gone there in the 70s, you would have seen the personal computer of today. They had invented, you know, the Windows icons, the mouse. So as a writer, I used to like to drop by there. And I was fascinated by an experiment they did about 20 years ago called the CoLab, in which they said, what will the working environment be like when there is ubiquitous broadband, when it's incredibly inexpensive to send any amount of data from one place to another? And they set up this working environment, one laboratory, one office really in Palo Alto, and another one in Oregon. Connected them together by sort of the mother of all T3 lines, and then built them out. So there was constant virtual connection in every sense between these two places. The best way to describe it is to describe the coffee lounge in Palo Alto. It looked like an ordinary coffee lounge. You'd go in and there was a table and chairs and a couch, coffee machine, and on one wall, a huge video screen. And on that video screen, live was the coffee lounge in Portland. And it looked exactly like the one in Palo Alto. Coffee, table, chairs, couch. And there was a little infrared body heat detector in Palo Alto that then sent a signal up to Oregon that said someone was in the coffee lounge. So you'd get your coffee and you'd start and have a little sip of your coffee, and your colleague from Oregon would come out, life-sized, standing right across from you, and you'd talk and you'd have a conversation and you'd finish your coffee and you'd go back to your offices. And this metaphor of constant connectivity was carried on throughout the offices. There was cameras and microphones all around. It was pretty complicated. It was a do not try this at home experiment. But what was interesting was then Xerox took work psychologists and they assigned a project to these two offices divided in half, studied how the progress of the work was done, and concluded that at the end of the project it was as if all of the individuals were in the same physical space. Really a profound finding that suggests that we're just now scratching the surface of what's going to be possible in terms of virtual collaboration. About 3 years ago, when I was still running Newsweek.com, we got an ad request from Patek Philippe. And Patek Philippe, the very expensive Swiss watch company, they wanted an ad that showed the time in 5 world capitals on Patek Philippe watch faces. And they were going to pay a lot for this. And I said, okay, now that's a pretty expensive watch, so those watch faces better be right on time. So I want the ad to go out and ping the atomic clock in Colorado and set itself to that. So I asked my programmer, who had just out of college, he was 22 years old, I asked him to do that. And he said, I've never really done that before. Do you mind if I hire a freelancer to help? I said, sure, go ahead, don't break the bank. And he went away and he came back 2 weeks later. The ad was done, worked perfectly, used just a little tiny snippet of code to go out and ping the clock and set all those watch faces. And I said, this is really nice, very economical. I'd like to meet the guy who wrote this. And he said, I don't think that's going to be possible. I said, why not? Well, he kind of lives in Moscow. I said, what? Well, you told me to get somebody at the best price, and I went out on the web, and he had the best prices. And then it struck me. He said, how did we pay this fellow? He said, well, that sealed pouch that Newsweek sends to the bureau in Moscow every day? Well, he wanted American cash, so I just put it in there, and he came in and picked it up. And I said, oh, my God. I'm glad I didn't know about that. But the point is, he was a brilliant young guy, and he's going to be a leader in IT someday, and he's not going to think about outsourcing as a way to save money, or he's going to think of outsourcing as just a normal way that you do business. And this is where social networking, I think, will begin to become important, because it's through social networks, particularly the younger generation, that we're beginning to define our interests, who we are, what we'd like to know more about. That's the real power of social networks. And it's the ability to take the identities that we create within social networks with us as we move across the internet in the form of this portable identity, so that wherever we go, we're recognized. That is actually, I think, one of the biggest challenges we're going to see over this next 5 to 10 years. And it's absolutely necessary, both for the safety of the internet and to really make the internet work the way that it should. When I first came to Silicon Valley, it was to write a novel, not a nonfiction book. I thought, great topic here, young people changing the world, getting rich. When you write a novel, it's like writing a nonfiction book. You study the industry and everything, but you also need to learn about the people. So I gave a lot of dinner parties. And at one of these dinner parties, the guest of honor was an older gentleman who'd already made a tidy fortune in the computer industry, and was pretty optimistic about where things were going. And everyone else was what we'd call liberal arts. There was a professor and a lawyer and a doctor. And towards the end of dinner, my friend from Silicon Valley said he'd just built a mansion in the hills above Silicon Valley. This was some years ago, and he'd put in audio light switches. Very sophisticated for the time. You'd walk in and say, turn on, the lights turn on, turn off, lights turn off, dim, dim. They dim down. Very cool. He loved these, and so did his 5-year-old grandson, who came to visit, got audio light switches right away, took to him like a duck to water, and then got sent to the other set of grandparents' house, who did not have audio light switches, and who, the first night, found this 5-year-old standing in a darkened hallway, shouting up at the light, "Turn on! Turn on!" And my friend told this story, and he leaned across the table and he said, now that is a young man who will grow up believing anything is possible. And there was just silence around the table. And I know what everyone else was thinking. They were thinking, that is a young man who will grow up not knowing how to turn on the lights. So I think right in there, where my friend's great optimism about what the future can bring and everyone else's real fears about what might be lost in the process, that is where all of we practical futurists have our work to do. Thank you.